The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on best practices in emergency management, a view from above. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the editor-in-chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar today is presented by ARC and Command Solutions. Today's webinar will offer a discussion of how emergency preparedness, planning, and response issues are addressed by many businesses and companies. And we'll focus on some of the more common weaknesses and mistakes that companies might make and offer some insight and ideas on how emergency preparedness plans can be fine-tuned to be the most effective. So before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items with you. Please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions to the speakers in the question box in that panel. You can send your questions in at any time, and the speakers will address them after the presentation. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of that panel. Clicking on that arrow will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded so you can access the question box. Also, if at any time you experience a technical difficulty, please send a message to us there in that question box, and someone will address you privately right away. Also, if you're interested in continuing education credits, you will receive a certificate of attendance for this webinar in an email from Facility Executive after the event, and you can report that to your association for the CEUs. So now I would like to introduce your speakers today. We have Dennis Hull, KJ Spurlock, and DAvid Trask. Battalion Chief Dennis Hull, retired, served the Blackjack Fire Protection District in St. Louis County, Missouri for 35 years until 2014. He served as the Chief Training Officer for the final 9 years of his career. He holds an Associate in Applied Science degree in Fire Protection Technology from St. Louis Community College and a Bachelor of Fire Science degree from Columbia Southern University. He is a 26-year veteran fire service instructor certified by the Missouri Division of Fire Safety, and he also holds numerous additional state fire service professional certifications, including holding for numerous FEMA and Department of Homeland Security certifications. He is an instructor for the National Safety Council and has extensive experience and teaching certifications in hazardous materials, weapons of mass destruction, and disaster response, incident command and emergency management, and he's also a FEMA National Incident Management System instructor. Your other speaker today is Battalion Chief KJ Spurlock, retired. He served the Pattonville Fire Protection District in St. Louis County, Missouri for 30 years until 2014. Battalion Chief Spurlock served as the Chief Health, Safety, and Training Officer for the final 6 years of his career, and he holds an Associate in Applied Science degree in Fire Protection Technology from St. Louis Community College. He's also a 20-year veteran fire service instructor certified by the Missouri Division of Fire Safety, and Chief Spurlock holds numerous additional state fire service professional certifications, including those from FEMA and federally, FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security certifications. He has completed the U.S. Emergency Management Institute's Professional Development Series. He's a Community Emergency Response Team instructor. He's also an instructor for the National Safety Council and has completed the OSHA 30-Hour Safety for General Industry program. Chief Spurlock currently serves on the Missouri State Region C Incident Support Team. He's certified as a FEMA Type 4 and 5 Incident Commander and has extensive training and teaching certifications in large-scale incident management and is a FEMA National Incident Management System instructor also. Your third speaker today is DAvid Trask, and he is National Director of Facilities Technology for ARC. And DAvid has presented at IFMA, ASHI, AIM, Facilities Expo, Construct Canada, and numerous other events across North America with a focus on helping organizations better manage their building information, and that includes emergency preparedness. He shares best practices for managing facilities in healthcare, municipalities, universities, government, and more, while providing key takeaways that can be put into practice in your facilities. So our agenda today, just to give a quick run through before we get going, is on the screen here, and it's planning issues and emergency preparedness, then the response issues and emergency preparedness. We'll also cover how to fill the gaps in an incident action plan, the benefits of seeking professional services to create that plan, and how a highly effective plan means a better return on investment for you and your facility and your organization. And then we'll run through an example of a mobile facilities dashboard that can help you with these things that we'll talk about today. So before we begin with the presentation and I hand it over, we're going to ask two poll questions, and you'll see that on your screen now. So if you would please take a moment to answer the question here, just asking what type of building do you work in? What type of building do you manage? We want to just get a sense of who's in the audience today. So we have hospital or healthcare, education, government, manufacturing, others. So if you could please take a moment, we will show those results on the screen. We'll see who's in the audience today, and then we will move along. looks like, okay, other 47%, but education is the most well-represented specific industry here today. Education, followed by hospital or healthcare, followed by manufacturing, and then government. Okay, good, thank you. And then the next poll question is, in the last year, we just want to know which of the following emergencies have you experienced most often? Have you experienced any of these in the past year in your facilities? A natural disaster, such as a hurricane, tornado, wildfire maybe, a water-related disaster, fire, a gas-related disaster, or an active shooter incident. So please let us know if you've responded, you've had any of those. Please put your vote in there. Okay, so in the past year, it looks like 43% have experienced a natural disaster, followed by 39% of water-related disaster, fire 13, gas 5, active shooter 0%, thankfully. So, okay, so without further ado, we will get into the presentation. I'll hand it over to these great expert speakers today. And I do want to start off with asking Dennis or KJ, what are some of the most common weaknesses that you've seen in various business emergency preparedness plans? Please share some of that with us, please.
All right. Thank you, Ann. That's a great question to start with. First, we'd like to say to everyone that it's important to remember that writing the emergency plan is not as easy as you might think it is. We're not being critical when we discuss the weaknesses that we've seen. We're just trying to point out that there are a lot of important elements in emergency planning and that must all work together to create a truly effective plan. We like to think of emergency planning like works of an inside of a clock. There are many moving wheels, cogs, and gears that all must mesh together for the clock to be able to function properly. Each wheel, gear, or cog are an important part of the plan, and they all have an interrelated connection. When they all mesh together, the mechanisms work as effectively as a fine watch. We start with the 4 cycles of emergency management planning: preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. These 4 main cogs turn the planning wheel to make the plan most effective. So these cover everything, like you see, from shelter in place to location. They all flow together, and those wheels have to help turn the other ones. And if you miss part of those in your planning process, something's going to break down when you need it. One of the most important parts does not mesh just right, is what I was just talking about, where the problems of the operations occur. Consider each gear or cog as a specific element in the plan, and each tooth or knots in each cog has a specific detail for that element. You can begin to see how important doing things right and completely can be. Each of the 4 major cogs has many smaller and increasingly more detail to them, so it's easy to design them and then insert them in the correct location in the plan to turn in the proper connecting cogs. And we like to use the incident management system for that. You need to create a program or a plan that can grow or shrink, whether it's a tornado or a simple heart attack. You have to be able to grow and shrink so those cogs can come and go, each one, okay? Each of the 4 main cogs has a smaller, increasing more detail, and it's have to insert them in the right place at the right time. There are several general areas that we commonly see where mistakes might cause a plan to be less effective than it could be. We see the improper formatting of the plan, a lack of vision, or too narrow of a focus on the needed detail. Sometimes we see a general lack of support of commitment for the emergency planning by the business leadership, and we also notice a lack of planning for the human element in some of the plans.
So KJ, is there any one weakness that you see more than any other in the plans that you've worked with to date?
Yes, and by far and away, most of the plans that we encounter share a general lack of understanding and knowledge and training of the emergency planning process. That means you've had someone delegated to do the plan that's not really trained in any of the things that we're talking about. So they get overwhelmed very quickly. I've got a organization that we're getting ready to work with now. They just called us and said, hey, we downloaded a whole bunch of stuff and we've got all these plans that look like they might work, but we don't know what we're going to do with them. So It's just that they don't have an understanding of what's going on when they see that. So one fairly new thing that we're noticing is it seems to be some confusion about certain terminology related to emergency preparedness and planning and business continuity. They don't quite know what to do with those terms. Business continuity tasks include protecting the business's reputation online, establishing and maintaining redundant systems and support systems, restoring your IT systems, and ensuring employees are able to return to a daily work task following an emergency. Emergency management exists to safeguard people from harm, protect assets and resources from danger, threats, and hazards, coordinate emergency drills and training sessions, evacuate and account for employees working with the first responders to ensure that the stakeholders make it through a crisis safe and sound. One particular area of, go ahead.
Hey, KJ. Yeah, another thing that tends to be overlooked too is who has access to the information. It's equally important that folks can get to it. So I actually just recently met with a facilities director at a hospital, and he said our emergency plan is rock solid. And I said, well, that's great. Where is it? And he said, well, it's in this binder on my shelf. And I said, well, who has access to your office? He goes, everybody has access to my office. And then as he was taking me on a tour of his office, he locks the door behind us. It's that type of information and having access to that type of stuff. It's who has access to that information. You as former firefighters too, think about that. If it's in a binder on a shelf and the building's on fire, where's the emergency plan? Is it in a binder someplace? Is it in a flip chart someplace? It's equally important to access that stuff on my mobile or access that stuff offline.
Yeah, David, kind of backing up what you said, that actually happened to me on a fire in a nursing home. The night charge nurse had no clue what the plan was or even where it was, because they weren't included in the planning process and they weren't even trained on how to use it or where it was even at. So I ended up running the fire and their emergency plan to evacuate that nursing home all at the same time. So like you said, that's exactly correct.
Goodness.
So great point, David, and we'll discuss that a little bit more in some upcoming slides too, because that's such an important issue that we want our attendees to be able to grasp this. The last part on that before we move on is also when you put positions out there and you have someone filling those positions, make sure you have someone that has the ability to put things into play. And if you've got someone in some financial roles or logistic roles, that they can actually do those purchases and make those equipment purchases and things that are needed, because sometimes those people are put in there and are not given the authority to make a decision or to purchase anything. Okay, so thanks. On one particular area of apparent confusion involves information technology and data security and backup systems. It seems that some businesses are equating business continuity plans and emergency planning equally under the title of business continuity planning. We understand that IT and data processing are a huge part of many businesses and companies, but we're concerned that they might assume that this is the only area that they need to address as being adequate to protect all of their business assets. It will not. And oftentimes when we ask someone about their continuity, they say, yes, we've got it covered. We've got all of our IT covered. But you're missing a lot of loops. We'd also like to propose that companies and businesses focus more intently upon their emergency planning and preparedness aspect, and then include a very strong emphasis on their IT and data and critical business functions in their recovery phase of emergency planning. This, in our view, provides them with an even more effective business continuity plan in the long run.
Thanks, guys. So this is Ann jumping back in. Can you provide an example of how a lack of understanding of the emergency planning process can be a problem? And then we are going to have a poll question after you let us know your thoughts on that.
Okay, yeah, and this is Dennis. Hello, everyone. It's a very common issue that we see. There are many sources for businesses and organizations and even families to obtain information about emergency planning, mostly from the internet. Go ahead.
It's funny, Dennis, it's funny you say that too, because I see this a lot, and I want to get your feedback on this, is where people will go online and they'll just do a search for a piece or a part of their continuity plan, or they'll find a piece or a part of their emergency plan, and they literally copy and paste instead of recognizing whether or not it is even a good fit for their business or their continuity plan. Do you see that as well?
Yes, David, we actually do see that quite often. People are confused about what to do and how to put this plan together, like KJ said earlier, and they think they're doing the right thing, and they are getting good information, but they're not getting all the information, or maybe not the proper information. So yes, we do see that quite often, and we have to kind of direct people to focus in certain areas that they're maybe not thinking of just because it wasn't on the downloadable file that they got.
And David, this is PJ. The other thing that we're seeing with that too, if you have multiple sites for your company, a lot of times the first person that gets it, they download it and they fill it in, and then they hand it off to location B, and they might make a couple changes or they don't, and then by the time it gets to location D or F, it's totally muted and it doesn't make any sense anymore.
So with that, we'll put out our poll question. Thanks, gentlemen, because that's what we want to ask about right now. Based on what you said and based on what's going on out there in the audience, we want to know, attendees, in your organization, how was the current emergency response plan created? If you can select one of the following that was the leading resource for you, I should say. Was it a free downloadable template? Did you have a planning committee, business administrators? Did you hire outside professional consultants, or are you not sure? If you can let us know that, then we will continue on this track after the poll. So it looks like the majority, 43% of our attendees, the emergency response plan and their organizations were put together by a planning committee format, followed by not sure, as well as business administrators were in charge of that, outside professional consultants, and then lastly, the free downloadable templates that are out there. So thank you everyone for your input there, and we'll hand it back to the speakers.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for your input. That helps us understand you guys very well. So many sources offer downloadable forms and plans for people to use. The problem is that most of these are very basic boilerplate fill in the blank forms, which we talked about just briefly there before that. They're not designed to be customized for a specific organization or industry, and they do not afford the forethought that would fill in many obvious gaps in the coverage of the plan. Just because you download an emergency plan and fill in the blanks, that does not ensure that you are actually prepared for anything. And we actually worked with another company that they did it by the administrator, like 2 people put the plan together. And then when we worked with the company, we ran a poll, and most employees didn't even know where the plan was or how to access it.
I've also seen where the plan doesn't necessarily jive with the actual state, from state to state. So they're downloading a form or downloading a template of something that's on a national level, but then there are also state regulations and state issues that come into play too that don't exactly coincide with that.
Yeah, it's easy to get overwhelmed very quickly. Here's a simple issue that we commonly not understood in many plans that we have seen. Kind of where you're talking about, David, is like the use of fire extinguishers, for example. Building and life safety codes like NFPA require that fire extinguishers are located at specific locations and intervals in each type of commercial building. The intent is to provide occupants with a tool to fight a small fire before it grows into the serious threat to the lives of the occupants. A good thing to have, right? The fire extinguisher is a good thing to have. The second part of that, though, the problem is that many employers don't know that OSHA in 29 CFR 1910 requires that if these fire extinguishers are present in your building, then every employee must receive training to familiarize them with the general principles of fire extinguisher use and the hazards involved in the incipient stage firefighting when it's first hired, and then once again every year after that. If employees have designated for their employees to use the extinguishers as part of the emergency response plan, they must receive training in the use of the equipment when they first receive the assignment, and then once again every year after that.
Kind of building on what KJ just said, we've actually seen plans that designate the person who locates the fire will grab the nearest extinguisher and fight the fire, but the plan totally lacks any training for that person to use that fire extinguisher, or how they know how to even use it if it's not required. But if they require that in their plan, they may not realize it, but they're going to be liable if they have not trained their people and then they've told them they had to do it. So there's a fine line there between the legality of it and the moral dilemma of training these folks. Training is not cheap sometimes, but as you can see in one of the slides we're showing here, we did this training for fire extinguishers with 10 different child care facilities, and they paid for the extinguishers to be recharged and used, but they made sure all their people got the training, which was a very outstanding thing. We don't see that very often. So basically what it is if they're in the building, you should know how to use them, and if you're designated to use them, then they better provide you some training with them.
Thanks, Dennis. That's a good point. And that's where that one says one thing and one says the other. So what do you follow? This is just a basic example of how someone writing the emergency response plan needs to have a working understanding of the responsibility to understand the code requirements. Okay. These are the kind of things we refer to when we're talking about gaps in someone's plan. Our job is to look for these gaps in the coverage of the planning and response elements of the plan. We want to help them correct or fill in the gaps to make the plan more effective as it can be used.
So, gentlemen, we know that emergency planning also includes directions for what should be done during the actual emergency or crisis. So can you explain a common flaw that you've seen in your experience, both as firefighters and as as consultants now? Can you explain a common flaw that you see in emergency response plans that you review?
Yes, Ann. Right now we're noticing that a major flaw that we're seeing most common occurrence is most emergency plans have multiple parts, but mainly the planning section and the response sections are the most widely used. Plans are usually written out in a text document form, printed and placed in that 3-ring binder, David. And then they may not be, there might not be multiple copies or printed or distributed. In an emergency, paragraph form is very difficult to follow. And those plans, I'm going to go back to David, they sit on the bookshelf for many years and often are forgotten about, or they're on a Q drive somewhere and the employees don't know how to access them.
Well, you hit it on the head there too, guys. I mean, I've just met with a school district and they ran a fire drill. And again, they've got the flip charts and the binders like everybody else typically does, but they actually tracked how many of the teachers actually forgot to grab the binders. So again, they're in every classroom, but how many of them actually forgot to grab the binders? And I asked him, I said, what was the number? And he said it was roughly half forgot to grab the binders. Think about that. That's a drill. That's not even live. And you guys as first responders, think about that. You're not thinking straight when it's live. So how many more would forget those? But then I asked a question is, what's in their pocket? Their phone. Why isn't it on their phone? So again, it's when you're running these drills, I've seen huge gaps like you're talking about where the folks don't know where they are. They have no idea, if it's been updated, all that kind of stuff. It's just huge gaps that you uncover quickly.
Yeah, David, that's a huge part of what our experience has been as well. They get out in the middle of the parking lot and they realize they don't have their binder. Well, now the building's on fire and they can't go back and get it. So they got 300 people standing in the parking lot. What do we do now? And like you said, There's got to be a better way to get people. The other part of it is training. why are these teachers that you mentioned not bringing that with them? Are they not being trained? Are they not being reminded? We all know how many times you have to do a certain event to remember the steps that it takes to do it. They should be doing these drills more often and concentrating on people doing what they should be doing. And a lot of times we see that as just kind of like, it's not a real high priority for that organization, so they just kind of don't do it.
That's great, and that's we're all seeing a common thread, David and Dennis. And so, yeah, so suddenly when the event occurs, you don't have your book or you don't know what to do with it. And like you said, David, if you evacuate the building but they forget to grab the plans on the way out, this is critical when it's a company executive that needs to enact their emergency response plans and get back into the building to look for it. So that's a key step to be able to have those plans in multiple areas. Like your system, David, we've worked with an organization, they keep some plans, one person had it on their desk and another in their car and also at home. It's got to be in multiple locations so that you can get it. Unfortunately, we had a scenario on the same track during their active shooter tabletop exercise that we were facilitating for them. As part of the exercise, we had denied access to the facility where the employees were shot and were declared a crime scene for several days after the accident. They had a hard time grasping why they wouldn't be able to get back into their building after an active shooter. All plans should be replicated once again in different locations and formats that would allow a company to immediately and effectively start or manage any event or crisis. This is one area where ARC's information, David, management dashboard is an excellent platform that you just talked about. That they've got to be able to access that. Businesses must utilize multiple methods to safely store, but easily access their emergency and business continuity plans. The plans must be reviewed, exercised, revised, and trained on, and improved on a strict and consistent basis. This is one area where ARC's information management dashboard would be an excellent platform for a business to utilize. We strongly believe that the details can be stored and become immediately available in such a format most surely adds to the overall effectiveness of emergency response plan. Once you said, David, they're going to walk out and they're going to have the phone in their pocket, so you can't.
Exactly. I just taught an education session at a session down in Northern California last week. And first question I ask, obviously, is, who's got a cell phone in their pocket? Everybody raises their hand. And then I ask them, keep your hand up if you've got your emergency plan and all of your emergency documentation on your phone, and everybody puts their hand down. And I ask them, why not? Why not? Everybody has a smartphone. Everybody knows how to use a smartphone. Why isn't it there? If they're like me, my phone's usually attached to my head, let alone in my pocket. It's always on me, always. So it should be there. I mean, it's got to be in a simple space, simple to access, easy to use, where everybody's got it and they can share it out with whoever the heck they need to.
Okay, so gentlemen, you spoke about filling in the gaps in the examples you provided earlier, the gaps in the plan. So if a company does have their plan reviewed or exercised by Command Solutions, your company, for example, what are some of the more serious types of gaps in a plan that you both would be looking for?
And this is one area we feel especially well qualified and prepared to assist our clients with. An example, if you're in our career as firefighters, we have the opportunity to see all angles of how to manage daily routine business and management office types functions. In the higher ranks, we both became supervisors, leaders, and incident commanders on all types of emergency situations. The lessons we came away with was that you must exercise different management and leadership techniques and skills based upon the type of situation you're in. Our daily office management skills were much more like the average business person's running an office environment. Okay, When we're operating as an incident commander of an emergency scene, we have to switch gears and manage in a different frame of mind. This is a lesson that we feel would be a great benefit to those involved in emergency planning and response. So you have to have some training and some front loading on how to switch your leadership styles from management to the incident command type system, and then be able to revert right back into it after the incident. We see emergency plans written like college papers or an office manual when they need to be in simple, direct, and brief. We very seldom see the use of any kind of emergency management system to direct the actual response elements of the plan. The designation of a command structure for the use during a crisis or emergency is also something that would benefit from the emergency benefit for a business during the emergency. Just like the military, the fire department uses a chain of command system. This should be part of every emergency plan. During a crisis, people look for leaders to lead and direct them to safety. Studies show that only 10 to 15% of the population can stand up and be the leader in a crisis. Businesses owe their employees the benefit of those types of leaders during the emergency situation. As a veteran fire department instructor, we have the skill sets and the experience to provide business leaders with this command type business training. The lack of the use of the incident command system and the emergency management system is one of the most common gaps that we'd like to see changed. It's by far the most effective way to manage the emergency, disaster, or crisis.
Okay, we put together a little list of what we think would help our viewers understand some of the things they could do to begin to fill in their gaps in their plans as they go back and review them. And I'll just briefly talk about each one. The emergency plan, like KJ said earlier, is a multi-part document, but it needs to be properly formatted so it's not so confusing. We've seen plans that had the training and the preparation and the response all interwoven in a paragraph format, but it wasn't clearly spelled out to what people were supposed to do during an actual incident or who was supposed to do what. So the formatting is a real big thing that needs to be a key priority for folks to follow. They need to have a planning team made up of all levels of the employees. We've seen companies that only the executives wrote the plan, and the mid to level and low level employees had no clue what the plan called for them to do or what the plan was even about. So the planning team is a good way to interact with everybody in the organization, for management to show that leadership and bring in the people that are down on the floor working, and include a few of those into the plan and get their perspective on it, because the plan is designed to help everyone. Performing a threat hazard identification risk analysis, we call it THIRA for short. That's where you're going to determine what is the most threat that you have to your business, and how are you going to identify that. You have to identify that by priority. What's the biggest threat you have to worry about that could hurt your business? So a lot of companies don't do an analysis like that, and they miss something that could come up and bite them, and they need to be ready for that. So that kind of follows into the next one, the all hazards approach. Yeah, we all do fires, we all do tornadoes, we all do earthquakes, and that's great. But what have we seen in the last few years that really expanded our needs is the active shooter. We've done more active shooter training in the last 3 years than you can imagine, because people don't have it in their plans and they're adding it to their plans.
Dennis, that reminded me of one of our clients that we had when we did their risk assessment, and we asked them what they had plans for hazmat. And they said, why in the world will we need a hazmat plan? And we said, well, because you set on, we walked them to the back door and we said, you sit alongside Interstate 70 and you're on the downhill side of that slope, even as that goes. So any carrier that has a spill on the highway is basically going to be in your back door. And they had never thought about a hazmat response.
And that goes back, like I said earlier, to understanding what their threat was. They never imagined that highway, and it was also a railroad track running alongside there as well. They never imagined that could be a possible threat to them that they needed to worry about. So that's a good example, KJ. The other thing they don't do, a lot of times we'll see that they don't have a chain of command during a crisis. Who's in charge? Who is making the call? Who is running the show? If nobody knows who's running the show, they're all going to run around and you're going to have 16 leaders instead of one. So that needs to be clearly spelled out. Who is going to be in charge of this outfit or this operation, and who's going to run it? And along with that, delegating the authority. If I'm the CEO of a company and I'm going to be the incident commander, for example, but now I'm on vacation when something bad happens, who's going to be the delegate to do the responsibilities that I should have been doing if I was there? So people don't think about having a redundant planning system for who's going to take over if they're not home or they're not there or they're on vacation. So those are the things that we really run into quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah, and along with those, they need to have a specific action plan for critical emergency functions. Okay, who to do, like Dennis said, who's going to do what. Make sure that all applicable regulatory requirements are followed. That's back to those OSHA and NFPA standards and other state regs that DAvid talked about. Establish the incident command system or command structure. With that too, we like to make sure that when you're creating that it's filled by position and not by a person's name. Because when we run our tabletops, if you have in your command structure and it says that DAvid is going to be the one to call for this, well, guess who's the person that's missing that day? It's going to be DAvid, and it leads to complete chaos. So we like them to do it by position and not by name. And also with that, if DAvid is a normal person, DAvid needs to fill out a role of his responsibilities during an emergency situation that he has available somewhere in those plans that person can pull up like a checklist so that they know what they're responsible for. We need to provide employee crisis assistance. We've seen that in some instances where they don't have a plan for their employees to psychologically recover from an incident afterwards and how to get back to work. Dennis, go ahead.
That really came to light in one of our active shooter drills where several of the employees were shot and a couple of them eventually died during our exercise. But we did that for a reason. When the company was finally allowed to open after the crisis was over, they only had 43% of their employees show up to work. And the CEO was just like, what's that all about? Why do so many of them not come to work? Well, these people are traumatized by what happened. They're not going to just walk back into the building where their best friend was just shot to death a week ago without some guidance and some counseling. And a lot of people, a lot of companies we see don't provide any type of assistance for the employees to deal with after a disaster. Like the people in Florida are dealing with right now. A lot of them are losing their homes. Is their business or company trying to help them out to get them back to work as soon as they can and support their families again? I mean, there needs to be some element of human contact in some of the plans as we see them. And we think that's a real important factor.
And Dennis, I'm glad you said we saw that in an exercise, because a lot of that doesn't come to light until you take your plan out and you actually try it to see if it's actually going to work or not.
And then the final issue is, of course, you have to plan and your drills and exercises, but you have to stick to the plan. Make a schedule for each year and stick to it. Don't let it get distracted by other issues. Have the plan when it's scheduled to have it.
Hey, good point, David. Have you seen that as well? We have people that are afraid to go ahead and put the drill date on the calendar and say, well, we might not be ready by then. Well, that's the reason we want to hold it. We want to see, and a lot of times the upper management sometimes are afraid to pull that drill and say, well, we're going to fail the exercise if we do it today. Well, it's not a point, we explained to them, it's not a point about failing. It's coming back and looking for the gaps that we have and knowing where to put the changes and make those changes in the plan.
Right. Well, and it's compounded too, because just because you have it written into your plan doesn't mean the incident's going to happen according to your plan. And that's what a lot of folks don't think about. They think if we have a fire or we have a gas leak or we have a water incident that happens, it's going to be just like XYZ clockwork. That's never the way it works. So I've seen folks that are even doing their drills that they'll throw a wrench into it. Like I was working with the university, and he was getting ready to do a live drill, makeup and all, and it was for an active shooter incident that was going to be, again, a drill on their campus. And he was looking for ideas on little ways to throw a wrench into stuff. And I said, okay, here's a wrench for you. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no cell service. Now what? And he said, well, gosh, now we're going to force everybody to revert back to paper. I said, not if it's on their phone local. So again, it's little wrinkles. Nothing goes according to plan in an incident. As you guys know, from being first responders, it never goes according to plan. You know, you kick in that door, you go through that doorway, you don't know what the heck's going to happen, because it's not the same incident that just happened last week or at another location.
That's right. We say that no fire is a routine fire. They're all different. But you got to make those changes. We recommended to some of the schools that we worked with on their fire drills, for example, that someone staying at the exit door with the sign that says fire, can't go this way, because they're used to doing the same door, the same place every single time. And then all of a sudden you have to go a different way. That's another one of those wrenches you're talking about.
Exactly.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen. So now we are going to have a poll question on this drill topic that you've been talking about, the exercises, tabletop exercises. And we want to find out from you, the audience, how often are you at your organization conducting an operational or functional tabletop exercise of the emergency plans? Can you let us know, is it every 6 months, annually, every other year, or several years, not scheduled, not on a regular schedule, or you don't know, or is it never done at this point? So please let us know, where you're at with that, and then we'll share the results as we've been doing.
And I think it's important to point out too that we're not looking at the normal fire drill every 3 months with this question.
Okay. So there you go. So 38% annually, on an annual basis, followed by 23% not scheduled, do not know. So it looks like annually and every 6 months as far as those who are doing it, 38% and 19. So what do you all have to say about that? And then we can move along. In addition to that, I do want to ask you, what consequences would a business expect to suffer if they fail to fix any known gaps in their emergency plans? I guess that could be the tabletop exercises, but beyond that, what consequences might be suffered with these gaps that you've all been talking about?
There are consequences, and we had a rather unusual one that kind of basically shocked us into reality, because we hadn't planned on that one. So we were basically guilty of not planning for an event that happened to us. We did a very detailed operational tabletop, and I mentioned it earlier. It was for an active shooter event at a fairly large organization that we worked for. And as part of the exercise, it was a tabletop operational exercise. And as part of that, we always provide an after-action report to the organization, give them what went wrong, give them what went right, and let them adjust their plan accordingly based on what they hired us to do, was evaluate their plan. And it's generally pretty well received that we go to such detail as to give them an after-action report and point these issues out to them with recommendations that we think would help them. We were requested under this circumstance to print a written after-action report with recommendations, which is exactly what we turned into the company. About a week after we turned it in, we get a phone call from the attorney for the company, very unhappy that we turned in such a report that would say that they were required to do certain things. And we were basically shocked that they hired us to do the event for them, with the understanding we were going to give them our impressions and our ideas and thoughts of what they could do to improve. And the attorney said, no, we're not doing that. You need to retract your after-action report. And we never did understand what the reason was until we finally found out that they thought that if we got that report and give it to them in writing, they would have to literally do every single thing that we had recommended on that report. and therefore she wasn't going to do that. She wasn't going to force the company or allow the company to change those things. So she basically rejected our after action report, and nothing got changed. The company did the whole exercise, and we found some pretty serious gaps in their plan, but nothing's getting changed because the attorney refuses to make them do it. So this kind of threw us for a loop. We'd never had that happen before. And matter of fact, a lot of times we get the opposite, where they call us back and say, can you help us figure this out? And add on to what you said. So we were guilty of not being prepared, I guess you could say. You could kind of bat on us, but I've never had an attorney refuse to accept an after action report until that day. So it just gives you an idea of what we run into. There are fines for failing to comply with OSHA. A lot of people don't know it, but the general duty clause is being used quite a bit lately, especially for active shooter and workplace violence incidents. That's where OSHA is covering those under the general duty clause. Some of your viewers out there, I'm sure, know that, and maybe some of them don't. But there are certain emergency action plans that they're required to have under OSHA, and those are listed under 29 CFR 191038. We're not going to go into all the details, but they can look those up for us. And KJ's got something to add to that.
Dennis, I will give you one example. We had a client call us and said that, and they had a small concrete company with 30 employees. OSHA walked in and asked them for their active shooter plan. And they said, what? They said, well, under the general duty clause, you understand in today's environment that you could have a shooter in your environment and you must provide a plan.
Yeah. And they didn't get fined because they were given a chance to fix it. But as we're going to see in a little while, there are some issues that people have been caught with. They need to identify the potential areas and emergency scenarios that are site-specific safety measures, especially some of the larger industries. They have hazardous situations and dangerous processes going on, and they are really under scrutiny for having those plans. And I'm sure your viewers that are there know that. It's all described in the 2016 OSHA Field Manual about willful and repeated violations for regulations. And I actually looked up the fines, the range of fines that OSHA has, and it was kind of surprising to me that they could go as low as $8,908, and they could go as high as $124,709 per violation, and that's per location. So if you've got a company that's got multiple locations across the country, and the same thing is happening at all of them, that's another per violation fine compounded every time they find it. One of the biggest ones I found doing some research, KJ and I did some research. There was a company in Maryland that was fined a total of $555,000 for willful and serious OSHA violations. $555,000. $210,000 of that was because they did not have an emergency action plan. And the remainder was because the employees were not trained on the safety procedures and there was no hazard assessment done. So they killed 2 employees during that event. There were unfortunate deaths because of the incident. The families were awarded $16 million in verdict because this company did not provide the proper plan or training or assessment. So this can get quite devastating for a company if they're not on their ball and paying attention.
Yeah, there was a Massachusetts company that was fined $476,000 for the willful violations. $56,000 again once related to what? The lack of emergency action plan or the lack of proper training. Rhode Island Pharmacy Company, $40,000 due to lack of emergency action plans. Another company in Massachusetts company, $42,000 for serious violations. Bang, once again, $21,000 for the lack of emergency action plan and proper training.
And did you have
Gentlemen,
something? Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, gentlemen. I just wanted to break in. You're talking about here the consequences and fines, and of course a lot of scary stuff that I'm sure facilities people and their organizations certainly would want to avoid. And throughout the webinar, you've been talking about kind of the tools that can help you make a great plan, and of course, as a result, on the financial side, avoid these types of things you're talking about. So technology is a tool that can be used for that, and I know you've mentioned the ARC platform a while back. So did we have an example we were going to show, a demo we were going to show? I think David was going to show that, right?
Yeah, David, if you could jump to that, that would be great.
Sure. Give me 1 second.
Good way to show. Yeah, I just think it's a good way to show at this point, as you've kind of rounded out, what the planning will be, and then what the consequences could be. Let's see how we can use this tool to put this all together. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you should be seeing my iPad right now. So think about it from a 30,000 foot view. Are you able to see my iPad, Ann?
Yes, I see it. Sierra University.
Okay. Yep. Hold on 1 second here. Just lost it. Give me 1 second here, and we'll connect.
Sure. Yes, I think it's just good to see, before we close out the presentation and a little down the line, that we can see kind of how this technology works.
You got it. So let's share my screen here. Okay. Oops.
Thanks for being put on the spot, David. We appreciate that.
Not a problem. So what we're doing here is essentially, you've got, picture this as your campus. So you've got a school or your hospital or whatever. You click on your individual building on your campus here, and it takes you to the individual information for that particular building. So you click on your emergency here, and it shows all the information for your emergency plan specifically for this building, not the other buildings, this building. So you've got your overall emergency plan, you've got your safe refuge areas. So this is the stuff that's typically in a binder or in a flip chart someplace, but now this is on my phone. So now I've got everything here. My safe refuge areas, click that, here it is. Here's where you evacuate to. Then you've also got shutoffs, indicated floor to floor. So first floor here, click here, here's my shutoffs. And this is site to site, again, right down to even instructions how to shut it off. All the information for your emergency plan should be available on your phone, even floor plans. So for Dennis and KJ, how many times have you rolled up to a building and you have nothing? You don't know what's on the other side of that door when you roll up. Now you could have access to the floor plans for a building. Click on here, here's first floor, second floor. Here's the floor plan showing where all the halls are, all the doors, everything for that building. Now you've got access to it all immediately. SDS, all your information associated with where the chemicals are located in your building. Click on a space and it lists all your different information, all your SDS sheets for every chemical in that building. You can click on any of them and it goes right to that SDS. So again, it's right back to everything's here all in one spot. And now I've got access to it all. Even evacuation routes, emergency equipment, being able to pull up and show where my extinguishers, all of it's right here. Drill down here, click on an individual extinguisher, and there it is. And to your point, KJ and Dennis, instructions how to use it. So just because I know where it is, if I don't know how to use it, here it is right here. Quick, fast, everything's right here. Emergency contacts, who do I call? And then be able to pull all this up on my phone. Even training, action plans, all the action plans. What do you do in case of an emergency, of an active shooter? Click here, there it is. And it goes right to my overall
David,
plan. Yes.
Excuse me, David, I don't see the list you're speaking of. I'm still looking at a blueprint. I think we're still looking at a blueprint. I just want to let you know.
Oh,
floor plan.
Okay, we're having a delay in the, gotcha. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a delay.
I just want to let you know.
Yeah.
And while that's waiting to get up, David, all those things you're talking about, remember that 4 cycles of emergency management? Mitigation. Yeah. Mitigation is about lessening your impact or stop loss. How do I stop the damage from the time that I've dialed 911 and the time the cavalry shows up, whether it's 10 minutes, a day, or 3 days? What are things that I can do on my end to protect my company and cut my losses on my impact.
Exactly.
With this information.
Having access to it. It's all about accessing the stuff when it counts. It's pulling it up when the heck I need it, where I'm at. And think about it. It's getting a call in the middle of the night. If you're an owner or you're a facilities director and you're responsible for a building and you get a call in the middle of the night because something's happening in your building, not having to jump in your car, you can pull it up on your phone right next to your bed, pull it up, and then be able to share that information out with first responders, with my team, share it out with the person who's on site, instead of having to run back to my office and pray that, you know, the building's on fire, but I sure hope my office isn't on fire because that's where my binder is. So again, it's accessing all that information. So go ahead and take control back, Ann.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that issue, but thank you. Thank you for the demo. I just wanted everyone to see kind of the high level view of what the ARC platform is all about. So, okay, thank you, David. Okay, so then we'll get back to the consequences that KJ and Dennis were talking about. There was some talk of fines, and there's obviously some more consequences that can happen beyond that. So go ahead, gentlemen.
Yeah, there's just a few ancillary things that people want to be aware of. They might lose customers. People might go somewhere else if they hear that the company's got a bad record of safety and things like that. They could have employees leave, be injured or be killed. The brand name or a corporate identity could get some bad publicity. Their reputation is going to be damaged. They may have higher insurance premiums or be denied premiums altogether. They could lose property, they could lose a structure, or they could end up in bankruptcy and fail. The business could completely fail. The consequences are pretty much endless as far as the company, the organization, how bad they want things to get and how much they want to take care of what they need to take care of. I'm sure most companies are not in the danger of any of these things happening, but there are some that we've seen examples of that are, and it's unfortunate people are being hurt and killed, and then somebody's paying the price, the families and the company both. So yeah, there's some things, once again, criminal and civil liability. We've seen people thrown in jail for doing things. We've actually seen firefighters jailed for not following procedure on their own department. They've actually been terminated and charged and fined and put in jail for failing to follow the plan that they were supposed to be following. So it goes through everybody, not just industry. Public servants, police officer was just convicted the other day for not following policy or something on an incident. So there's a lot to think about here. We're not trying to scare people, but there are things out there that are happening.
Thank you, gentlemen. So then we'll move on to the next section and the benefits of seeking professional services to create the plan. So what are the benefits of using professional services to create an action plan? There is a lot, of course, to handle and put together. And as we've been hearing too, there's a lot of different tools and approaches that facilities people and their colleagues can use to put together. But what does a professional services firm add to that mix?
Okay, some of them, we can help them get out of the weeds that they're stuck in. We can help them not be overwhelmed with it. Their staff member is not taken away from their normal duties. We find that a lot of times that, hey, I'm paying this individual so much per hour, and I can't afford them to be out there to try to figure out how to do emergency plans. And we provide them with a process and templates that are easy to follow. The planning process can be expedited and experienced professional. We can help them. We're almost like a facilitator like you are today, Ann, and keeping them on track during their meetings and different things like that to keep them flowing. We can outside personnel offer an objective viewpoint. Well, the person that, if it's a one person that put it together, this is my plan, and it might not be able to see the big lion coming out of the weeds just because they're looking at the rabbit at the edge of the tree line, you know. Consistency throughout the entire process is maintained. Able to provide guidance for technical resources, standards, and requirements that we talked about earlier. Okay. You can be assisted with training of your emergency response team members, your emergency communication systems, how to use it and how to be trained on that. Do you know how to talk on the radios if you have those different things? Crisis management versus leadership that we talked about. Understanding the National Incident Management System. Also, this is very big if you're getting any grant fundings for your program. You have to be trained in the incident management system to be able to get some of your grant funding sometimes. And then the incident command team development, drills and exercises, properly formatted Pacific incident action plans, facilitations are required emergency drills and exercises, and guidance in your plan review. Just that third eye looking at it that, oh, we didn't notice that, glad that you caught it kind of thing, Ann.
Okay, so we're getting toward the end now, and I do want to ask you starting to wrap it up, how does an effective emergency management plan lead to better return on investment? Can you hone in on what you've been talking about and what that return on investment is for the organization?
Okay, real briefly, of course, you're going to minimize the risk of being fined or found in violation of something, because we are able to look at the codes. We are able to research that for people. They may not understand some of this stuff that KJ and I have been familiar with for many, many, many years. So we could help them with that. Could be beneficial to use an outside contractor as opposed to paying a salaried employee to do this work while the salaried employee is not doing their job. Expenditures can be eliminated by defining critical functions and operational staff. During an emergency, you're going to be operating and trying to get back in business, but we need to define who's the most critical people and what's the most critical things that need to be restored, and we can look at that. Adjusting work schedules for critical staff. Some of the plans we've seen don't include a work from home area, or they can't log into the internet from wherever they may be and complete some of their work that way. That's an option that a lot of companies have. I know a lot of them do use it, but some of them we've seen don't utilize it where they could. Prearranged contracts and memorandum of understanding. If you've got a contractor lined up to provide gasoline for your backup generator for your facility, okay, what if that contractor is unable to provide the fuel that you need? Do you have another one in line to support him, to support the backup? Do you realize how long your generator is going to last before it runs out of fuel? Things like that. Memorandum of understanding with another agency to where they might loan you some of their building space to help you get back up and running again. Those are things that you can reach out ahead of time and make it an easier recovery for you. And then, of course, your good public reception, reputation, and all of this is designed to do one thing, and that's get that recovery time objective down significantly. Companies want to get back in business after they're hit with a disaster or an emergency, and that's part of what we usually try to look to with our planning with them, is help them aim towards that goal. Is if they do have something happen, plan for it correctly, respond to it properly, and be able to recover from it as quickly as possible. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we're all about. We want people to get back to normal as quickly as possible.
Dennis, can you expand on Morgan Stanley a little bit? They got there in front of them.
Well, yeah, that's a lot of people don't realize this, but there was a bombing in 1993 at the World Trade Center in the basement, and a lot of people, 6 people were killed in that. Morgan Stanley was an investment company that had offices in that building, and it took them 4 hours to evacuate their employees out of that building after that bombing that day. When 9/11 came, Morgan Stanley actually had a gentleman by the name of Rick Riscola who said, they're going to come back. They're going to do this again. They're going to attack us again. And they put him in charge of their security and safety. And Rick was a stickler for getting people down them stairs on a regular evacuation drill basis for many years. Even the CEOs participated. They weren't happy about leaving their offices, but they did it. Well, when 9/11 happened, Rick Riscola got those people from 4 hours in 93. He got those people out of that building in 45 minutes. And adding up all the people that were there was 3,933 people that Rick Riscola and his team got out of those buildings in 45 minutes as opposed to 4 hours. So just imagine how many lives were saved by the company taking it seriously, making a plan, sticking with it, and practicing it, and look at the success they had out of it. Of course, in 9/11, there's not much of a success to think about, but in that situation, I think this is a shining example of how things can work and should work most of the time.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for that ARC demo earlier. We do have a few minutes for some questions. So we've had some come in, and I'm going to just kind of shoot them off, and whoever wants to jump in, feel free. You've talked about how disasters or emergencies don't fit one size fits all. You never know how they'll go, even one fire is not the same as another. So I wanted to ask, how can you make sure that the plan that a facility has in place is equipped to handle both relatively small events, however that may be classified, as well as large disasters? So how can that plan begin to build as a framework for that all hazards approach, shall we say?
And I'd like to jump on there real quick. That's
Sure.
The incident management system, the National Incident Management System. And we use the NFPA 1600 too in our organization when we train. But having that system, the way that works is you've got one person in charge, and he can be then, he's got finance, logistics, operations under him, and then under those are different things. So you have to have that flow of information down. You don't want 15 or 20 people calling that incident commander or the CEO, whatever you want to call them. But having the incident management system training allows you to have a system that can grow. You can take pieces. Remember those cogs that we had in the very beginning? You might not need all those for the small heart attack, but you need them all for the hurricane. So that incident management system, the national system, is designed to expand and grow for those small to large incidents.
And just a quick follow-up to that, with the National Incident Management System, where would a facilities person go to? You had mentioned grants. My point is, you had mentioned being certified in that to perhaps access some grants for planning, and I'm sure that's important to many in the audience. Is FEMA the first point of contact for pursuing that path, or where would you advise they look?
Yeah, they typically came from the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. And you could go on FEMA.com and investigate. You just type in the acronym NIMS, N-I-M-S, and they could get information on all the different NIMS classes. There's all kinds of different classes. I know one here in our area. If you're a director of a publicly funded district, say a school district or a fire district or even a water district, you're required to have a certain level of NIMS training by the federal government. That's a requirement to be a public official in those capacities here where we're at. I imagine it's that way pretty much all over the country. A lot of people don't realize that, and a lot of them don't seem to get the training somehow. They maybe don't know how to go about getting it or where to go get it. But our organization we're all certified NIMS instructors, but you can get information off of the FEMA website.
You should at least have ICS 700, 100, and 200.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So then we have a question for David about the ARC platform that we've been talking about as well as one of these tools. So the question is, what's involved with getting a mobile dashboard such as that set up with the facilities information that's existing and that may exist in the future? Can you talk about, David, how that goes implementation is like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very simple. I mean, it's taking all of the program documents that you have and also providing some best practices and mapping that information out. But at the end of the day, that's part of what we do. Our team comes in, we map out all that information for you, even calling out where all that stuff is, where it's located, all your fire extinguishers, defibrillators, all of that. And then it's put into a format, and all the training is done with that, how to access all of that. It's a very simple process, extremely simple process. But at the end of the day, I mean, obviously reach out to me and I can help you get going on that.
Thank you. Thank you. And also something that had caught some interest, because you had mentioned in one of the examples of an exercise you had been on with a client, I think, that you threw out a kind of a wrench. What if the Wi-Fi went down? So the question is, what happens if internet access goes down with a platform such as ARC's platform? Is it accessible offline too? Is it stored locally, or how does that work?
It certainly is. Again, it's equally important to have access to it as to have access it offline. Our system, anyway, is located on your device. So you can download it locally on your device. And it's just flipping a switch, and it downloads it directly to your device. I've got multiple buildings on my device right now where it's all local. So if I need, every cell tower goes down, my Wi-Fi is down, as long as I have power on my phone and I carry a battery backup as well, I have access to my plan. So I can do everything. I can pull up every part of my emergency plan directly on my phone. And it's all local on my device. So again, think about that as it's in my pocket right now. So every cell tower is down. I can still pull it out of my pocket and open it up and have it. It's all right there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, it does look like we're out of time, and I really appreciate all of your insights today. I appreciate our audience attending and sending in those questions, of course, and participating in the poll questions. So thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Ann.
And we also want to thank ARC and Command Solutions, our gentlemen's companies, for presenting today. And thank you for our audience for attending, as I mentioned. Now, as I also mentioned at the start today, if attendees are interested in continuing education credits, you will receive a certificate of attendance in an email from Facility Executive after this webinar, and you can report those to your association for continuing education. Lastly, a recording of this webinar will be available online shortly at facilityexecutive.com. You can also check out the ARC website at earc.com. And everyone here has their contact information up. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to any of the individuals listed here. I'm sure they'd be happy to help. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon.